What we need to do is take it a step further, actually provide remedies, actually provide, we believe there should be a bilateral agreement with a global union to institutionalize these policies that recognize international human rights and the core labor standards. And we could talk about that later around global framework agreements.
I'm actually struggling with some of these generalities, so just help me. Are you suggesting that there are big U.S. companies that don't recognize what you're calling the international right of freedom of association?
Yes.
Okay. Give me toss me.
That was a trick question.
No, it really was not. It really was not. For example, or when have you called someone and said you're violating that principle and what are you going to do about it, and they weren't interested in having that conversation? Or they were?
I mean,
I think that happens a lot. Give us an example on both sides.
They weren't. I mean, I hate to single out specific employers in this case. I'll just say, for example, on the positive side, there is a major U.S. employer with a big operation in Bangalore that I contacted 2 weeks ago because their contractor, and then I'm speaking not about their direct employees, but rather their contract employees in India were fired because they were not allowed, they didn't want them to have a union. And they did, relying on their CSR policy, get involved and contact the contractor and correct the situation. Now,
you mean some employees were rehired as a result
correct.
of your intervention?
I mean, they told the contractor this isn't in line with our CSR policy. Here's our policy. We respect the right of freedom of association. Now, I would say there's a French bank, Société Générale, with a very, very strong CSR policy that extends down to its suppliers. And they will intervene in every situation. They're in 80 countries where their employees' rights to form a union, to be paid minimum wage, some basic fundamental rights are not respected. It comes up a lot. They've intervened in Poland. They've intervened in Tunisia. I mean, this is sort of the basic garden variety work that we do at the global level. And we're now discussing with them institutionalizing that in a formal agreement that would establish those rights and how we would handle disputes and what the process would be. So I think that...
so this was a US-based IT company doing business
yes.
in Bangalore.
Yes.
So I'm not
and again, I don't really want to single them out. I'm not sure they want to get the...
They did the right thing.
They did the right thing.
Except let me give you the opposite. In Australia, we've exported, unfortunately, a lot of the American corporate model, and there's a war going on between the European social model and the American corporate model. And I'll give you a name. Sol Trujillo, who heads up our major telecommunications company, will not bargain with genuine members of the union. Now, we're engaged in a huge battle.
What's the company?
It's called Telstra, but the American management, and there have been a trio of them at the helm, simply refused to recognise the right to bargain collectively. Now, that's just one. I could name you tens of companies. We won't today because we're here to say, but you've got to begin with honesty. And if we're not honest about the fundamental legal rights of workers and we can't put those on the table, then the rest of it is just whitewash.
Okay. Neil, you've had a lot of experience with the CSR movement around the whole issue of factory monitoring and compliance, inspectors, the work done by companies like Nike and Gap and Timberland. Walmart had a big meeting with their Chinese suppliers just last month around labor and environmental issues. What is your assessment of the success and or shortcomings of this model for improving the conditions of workers in poor countries around the world? Has it accomplished much?
Recently, I saw CSR described as a $60 billion annual industry. I would have preferred another word to industry, maybe process, but they used the word industry. Huge resources, but I think with limited impact, certainly on the labor front. Yes, there have been successes, and I think the major success has been the growth and awareness of working conditions and the lives of people in different continents across the world who supply the goods that enable us to live. Success also, and I think that and I'm sure Nike wouldn't want me to say otherwise. 15 years ago, Nike would not respond to a request from a global union federation. On a monthly basis, I have a teleconference with senior executives of Nike to explore and deal with issues that have arisen in their supply chain across the world. So, positives. However, in the 12 years since CSR took off in a big way, particularly in the textile, clothing, and footwear sector, real wages in the sector have fallen by 25%. Working hours around the world have increased by 25%. And every year in the Pearl River Delta, 40,000 fingers or part of fingers are lost by workers. So huge resources, limited impact.
And real wages have declined because of the movement of jobs continuing from high wage to low wage places?
Today we have maybe production of textiles, garments, footwear carried out in maybe 160 different countries across the world, primarily for export into the markets of, 30 countries. Intense competition, and in the absence of national regulation, a race to the bottom. But let me say on CSR, I think the question now is the current approach sustainable? Can we continue to spend $60 billion a year for limited results? And some of the key corporations share our point of view. For example, Gap and Nike, two US corporations, have both said the current approach, and that is the sort of social audit approach, is not sustainable in the long term. And what we need is to give responsibility back to the workplaces and to have that overseen through mature systems of industrial relations. I think that actually means empowering those involved in supply chains, the local suppliers, their workforce, but it also means drawing in national governments to provide the regulatory framework that will provide for good industrial relations. I think that's CSR Mark II, and that's what we're working towards at the moment.
Well, maybe that's a good time, Sharon mentioned it, for one of you to talk about what did happen in Cambodia and whether that's a duplicable, whether that model can be moved to other places. Because how do we get from this world of social audits and inspections to what you're speaking about, which is a more locally rooted labor movement that I assume would resemble what we understand as the labor movement in Europe and the US?
Mm-hmm. Cambodia is an interesting example, a country quite isolated, with no industrial history, which became a producer of garments for export largely because of the existence or non-existence of quota initially. During the Clinton administration, a trade agreement was signed with Cambodia, which included labor conditionality clauses. Interestingly, those clauses were positive in the sense it wasn't, we will punish you if you don't behave. It was, we will reward you if you do behave. And Cambodia was offered increased access to the US market as their labor conditions improved. But of course, on the ground, the capacity did not exist to ensure the application of labor standards in Cambodia. And that was where it became necessary to bring in the specialist global organization that is able to deal with these issues, the ILO, the International Labour Organization. And there was established in Cambodia a Better Factories program.